we're late. Welcome to the Battle of Plattsburgh Association's Plattsburgh Press Republican Theater. How's that for a deal? Now, they generously donated some services for us, and in memory of that, we've named the theater the Press Republican Theater. It's not often that we get to talk about one of our own kind, who is not only one of our own kind, but a statue in our community. Frank has been around. When were stones invented?
Yeah,
That's a guy
before that.
But we know Frank as a diver. We know Frank as an amateur historian. We know Frank as a boat captain. We know him as a salvager. We know him as a master of the lake. You know, he's been from one end to the other. He used to run a small museum downtown. He had his own radio show. He at the captain's table. Remember the captain's table?
Can't forget it.
And the things just go on and on. And he's truly one of the people that we call colorful in our community, and we mean that reverently. One thing you can say about Frank is, regardless of whatever's happened, if you've ever been in a row with him, 10 minutes later it's forgotten. And he's everybody's friend. And we truly cherish people like that in our community. But what we cherish about Frank tonight is his knowledge and his anecdotes and his stories. And sit back and relax, and you'll be mystified. Frank Pabst.
Thank you, Keith. One thing that Keith forgot was the dog in the manger part, which I've been accused of, and I'm honestly, I've done it. I'm the guy who will tell people to wake up and smell the coffee, and that's going to be part of tonight's presentation. I'd like to say I've got all kinds of visuals, CDs, DVDs, etc., etc. You're stuck. This is as good as it's going to get. Many years ago, I had one of my first experiences underwater with a syrup can with a window in it, and a kid with a bicycle pump, a couple of flat irons down the hold of an old schooner that was sunk down in the East River. They sunk it as a breakwater. I wound up as a tender for Robbins Ripley Company, worked over with Merritt Chapman and Scott. My first actual underwater experiences was with a hard hat, working in Bayonne, New Jersey, where you measured the water by viscosity. It was barely able to penetrate it. But I was a helper underwater for the lead diver on the team, and I worked for a while at that. It's wherever the money was is where I went. The scuba diving I tried out in California, a little bit down in Florida, and I was just totally blown away by the freedom and mobility that you have underwater. Other methods of diving, you had hoses, you had umbilicals, you had all kinds of things hanging on you that you had to worry about fouling. With scuba diving, you were just as free as the fish that were around you. And a lot of them were around because they didn't know what it was. They thought you were a big fish. The exciting part of the diving is you're like underwater mountain climbing. I mean, you walk up a mountain, you're climbing over rocks, but when you're diving, you can just float up the surface of a wall underwater and go anywhere you want to go. You're just like a bird underwater. And there's no cell phones, there's no telephones. You can totally relax, be free, and enjoy your environment. It's interesting because a large portion of the world is covered with water. And a large portion of artifacts in Lake Champlain is covered with water. We can go to various land sites and excavate, mark, identify, and recover objects from archaeological discoveries on land. But underwater, it hasn't been touched. When in a part of a battle where a cannonball winds up in the water, the last human being to touch it was a couple of 100 years ago in the middle of a battle that our country was struggling for survival. And that's the thing that kind of got me hooked. When I came up here, it was 1955. I was up here once in 1949, but not diving. And I went diving with a friend of mine off of the Royal Savage Reef, which is that small reef that projects off the southeast corner of Valcourt. and he had a minnow bucket, and we went down with a snorkel, not diving, just snorkeling, and he filled the minnow bucket up with shot, musket shot, grape shot, all kinds of stuff. It seems that we'll be getting into the Royal Savage in a little bit, but it would to find these items so freely was that was the hook that got me, and I'm not of the world of academia by any wild stretch of the imagination. I've got 2 weeks of high school and got thrown out. And I started reading. I love to read. I always have loved to read. And I started reading about the history of the area and totally taken by what our ancestors went through to give us the country that we enjoy today. Lake Champlain, you might have 25-foot visibility. I could be here, an object could be back where Roger is. If it's on the other side of that wall, I wouldn't see it. So you're limited somewhat as what you can see underwater. So you can go right past something, and you got to do your search patterns in conjunction with what your visibility level is. Back years ago, long before the wars on the lake, the Indians inhabited this area. One of my diving buddies, he's been a buddy of mine for the past 40 plus years, is a retired earth sciences teacher from Port Washington, New York, and he ran the harbor patrol down in Port Washington. He lives on Treadwell's Bay, and he has shown me some items that he recovered from Paleo-Indian campsites that are 15 feet underwater. Well, back when the Paleo-Indians inhabited this area, 15 feet of water now converts to a dry beach that these Indians were camping on back then. The lake progressively has gotten deeper and deeper each year, and has other reasons for that. One of my divers, a fellow named Gary Allen, wound up diving off of the lighthouse at Valcourt. He found the remains of an Indian canoe with Indian pottery, and he brought back an excellent piece of pottery, and I believe that's at the New York State Museum now, and I believe it's been aged at the year 1200. Lake Champlain is one of the main highways between Canada and New York City. It was the main highway for armies on the move, commerce, rum runners on the run. Lake Champlain carried it all. When the British were shocked by our audacity that we wanted to declare our independence from Mother England. And to that end, they figured that they would just bring us back under the British thumb by military force. So here on this lake that's 135 miles long, 400 feet deep, and 650 miles of shoreline, the British massed an army in Montreal and planned on marching down the shores of Lake Champlain, on through the Hudson Valley, and eventually to New York City. And had they been able to have been successful with that maneuver, they would have divided the 13 colonies pretty well down the middle and put a natural water barrier that would have made it difficult for us to survive. The first attempt was in, well, actually the battle, one of the first major battles on the lake was in 1759 in the French and Indian War. We're going to be celebrating that in the upcoming year. The thing that ties it in locally is there were 3 French vessels on the lake and a British squadron chasing them. They sailed up the lake and they sought refuge in a bay behind a big bluff, which is now where Cliff Haven is. And if you're down Cliff Haven Way, you'll see there's what's left of an old stone jetty down there. I don't know what lies under the jetty, but back in the early 60s, 3 young lads were chasing a sheep's head, and they came across a cannon. And I had a scuba shop at a marina down where the Rusty Anchor is, and they called me up, and we went up with my barge and hoist. We raised 2 bronze cannons that weighed 1,600 pounds apiece. They were spectacular. They were cast in 1748. They have the whole nomenclature on the crest of the cannon. It's got George Rex, it's got the cannon maker, the town that it was made in, and the year that it was made in. And they were British cannons that were captured by the French from the British, and now the French boats had gotten themselves into a pickle. The British squadron was closing in. They knew any confrontation with the British would be a disaster. So they scuttled the boats. They sunk them, chopped holes in the bottom, threw all of the ordnance over the side, and then took off overland, walked back to Montreal. So these young lads found these cannons, and they asked me to go get them. I went down, I loaded both cannons, we took them back to my dock at the harbor. I asked them, I said, we had a small museum on Miller Street at the time where the old one-room school is. I said, do you mind if these go in a museum? These really should belong to New York State, actually, according to the law. I said, but we'd like to display them in a museum. And the kids agreed to do so at first. We were loading the cannons down at Peru Dock, and there was a gentleman there who was the auctioneer who was going to be auctioning off the contents of the Hotel Witherell. And he discussed with the parents of these young lads what the potential worth of these cannons were. And it kind of looked like one of the old-fashioned cash registers if you looked in their eyes as the numbers just flitted through their head. And they could feel their wallets inflating as the man talked to them. We got the cannons up to my marina office, and I called Dr. Alan Everest, who was in charge of the history department at the college, and a gentleman and a true historian. I said, Dr. Everest, you're an employee of New York State, you're an employee of the state college. I have these cannons, according to Section 33 of the state education law, they belong to New York State. Can I bring them up to the college? Will you receive them and hold them until their disposition can be granted or decided? He says, yes, he would. But in the meantime, the parents hired a couple of people. They backed a truck up to my truck on my property, skidded the cannons off my truck into their truck, and took off with them. The cannons were held in a garage at Cliff Haven for 18 years thereabouts. And along with some other things, we found 5 anchors, a 2-pound swivel gun that had been stopped and spiked. Fortunately, thank the good Lord, the swivel gun is in good hands. It's over at Clinton County Historical Society. It's been preserved, and it's I think, intact again with the shot and everything. But in any event, these cannons were hidden in this garage until they showed up at Sotheby's auction in New York City. They drew $76,000. Well, a lot of upset was over what's happening with these cannons, New York's art history, being auctioned off for $76,000. And New York State got a judge to bring an injunction against the sale, stopping it. They paid the young lads who stumbled across these cannons $45,000 for storing them for 18 years. I take umbrage at that because for 18 years, school children who were hearing local history in the 4th and 5th grades could have seen these cannons and had a little more feeling of the reality of this battle that took place. So for 18 years, that knowledge was hidden in the garage. In any event, the cannons finally got into public hands. One of them now is up at the Clinton, the college, Clinton Community College up on the hill. And the other one is down at the Interpretive Center at Crown Point. And it's good. They're in a place where people can see them. They can look, learn, and observe just how they work. An interesting point, I mentioned the 2-pound swivel gun. We took the plug from the muzzle. It had been stopped and spiked. It was thrown over the side. Took the plug from the muzzle, and the ball in charge was dry and intact after 200 years underwater. It was interesting also in the respect that back in those days, the cannoneers would pre-measure the powder charge into a length of animal intestine. They'd knot it at either end, and they'd put this little pouch of powder, so they're able to take it, put it in the cannon, do their procedure, spike it, fuse it, and fire it. It speeded up their ability to fire a cannon by having the powder all pre-measured, ready to go. We went back, we did a few more searches around the area, and there was a lot of controversy about, there were 2 diving clubs in town, and there was a lot of controversy between them. The state police said nobody can take anything out of that site. So we went in at 2 o'clock in the morning and we got like 5 muskets out of that site. And they all wound up going into museums. State museums got some of them, and I don't know if Roger's got any of those or not. But they recovered in the daylight another 15 muskets out of that site. And I don't know what happened to those 15 muskets. One of the anchors is sitting in a yard down at Cliff Haven. I don't know what happened to the other 4 anchors that came out of there. They all went off into the wild somewhere. But it was a disaster in the respect that these things were lost, so to speak. But I've always felt that if I find it, someone else can find it, and if I can recover it, someone else could recover it. At least if I recover it, I know where it's going to go. And everything that I've recovered has gone into the museums one way or the other. Later on, a sword was recovered from there. We presented that sword to Mayor Rennell back about 15, 20 years ago. It was a beautiful pearl handle, white sword. The Lake Champlain celebration is coming up next year. 2009, 400th celebration of discovery of the lake. Because it's got a 9 in it, they're also incorporating French and Indian War information into it. I serve on the Citizens Council for Lake Champlain, and I've worked down in the canal with my tugs and barges in the years past. They have acquired a boat, and I have put in a request. I don't know how it's going to work out. They're telling me it looks pretty good, but I put in a request. The name of the boat is the Day Peckinpah. It was built in 1925. It's all steel. It's 192 feet long, 35 feet wide. It was built to transport bulk cement. They'd haul cement down off the Hudson River, and they'd load it in this boat, and they'd take it out to Chicago and Cleveland and ports on the Great Lakes. It later served as hauling grain. It's got a couple of beautiful diesels in it. And the boat now has come into the possession of the New York State Museum. Pardon me for sitting, but I've got 2 bad feet. The feet never bargained to carry the belly around, I guess is the problem. The Day Peckinpah is, the main hold now is 140 feet long by 30 feet wide. And what I suggested and requested in my request to get the boat up on Lake Champlain was to have each historian from each town on the lake put up an easel with a placard describing the historical advantage of their town. From the advisory council, we want to do something to make sure that the boaters and the fishermen that use the lake use it responsibly. We hope to bring it up and bring it up next June so that the school children can tour this boat as it makes its stops around the lake. And it will hit all of the lake ports, both on the Vermont side and on the New York side. The Day Peckinpah, we're trying to get a donation of fuel for it. When we started trying to get the donation of fuel, it was about $2.50 a gallon, so it's over $5 now. The next event happened where the British were upset with us for declaring our independence, and they decided to bring us back by military force. So massing a large army in Montreal again, planning on marching down the shores of the lake. Soldiers can step around rocks, trees, and other obstacles, and their supplies can meet them by water. And that way you don't have to build a road from Montreal to New York City. It was a good plan, an excellent plan. But in order to do that, they had to have supremacy of the lake. Well, there had been little skirmishes going on, but in 1776, America's first Navy had been constructed down in Whitehall and sailed up and anchored at Valcourt. Now, the U.S. Navy Department doesn't readily admit to the fact that this is America's first Navy. But for my money, my own personal opinion, it was commanded by one of the most brilliant leaders and generals that we had. And as I read more about Benedict Arnold, I realized that if the government had done to me what they did to him, I might have been doing the same thing as he did. If in fact, he really did commit an act of treason. But nonetheless, Benedict Arnold was the commander of America's First Navy after serving valiantly in Canada and other places, and he anchored across the Straits of Valcour. The British sailed down the lake, they saw where he was, they came about against the wind and engaged them. The battle waged all that day. Arnold had taken some terrific losses. His boats were leaking, they were shot, many men wounded or killed. It didn't look very good for him. The Royal Savage tried to sail under the cover of the lake, of the island, and exit to be able to deliver one or two good broadsides. She ran aground on that little reef on the south end of the island. If you look at the south end of Valcour, there's a little tiny island down there, and she ran aground on that island. And she sat there hard and dry, and the British used it for target practice. That's why when I went out there in '55, you're out there and there's shot laying all over the place. The Arnold went to the Congress, made that his flagship, and he ordered the men to take the oars that each vessel was equipped with. They wrapped the oars in blankets and cloth and pillows, anything they could do to muffle them. And with one white light on the stern of the lead ship, they rowed through the British lines. Overconfident, the British didn't see them. The next morning, the British woke up, and the American fleet was gone. They chased them down the lake. They scuttled a couple of boats at Schuyler Island, scuttled another one. Another one was lost in a battle down at Whalen's Bay. And finally, the remainder of the fleet went into Arnold's Bay, Vermont, and with a few of them escaping down to Whitehall. It was a loss. We lost the battle, and the odds were highly stacked against us. But in spite of the fact that we lost the battle, we won the war, because we had delayed the British enough in October that by the time they were ready to invade us again, they knew that we were strong enough to repel them. And that worked. That worked for quite a few years. In that 1776 battle, many things happened. The ship New York, preparing to fire a cannon at the British, lit the cannon off, and the cannon exploded. Friends of mine diving out Lake Champlain found a fraction of it. They went and got advice from the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, and in cooperation with them, set up an archaeological dig on the bottom, and section by section excavated and identified artifacts from that battle. They've got the cannon, I think, about 75% complete. But it's truly a beautiful thing to see that the work, the hundreds of hours that went in, and Roger was a part of that, the hundreds of hours that went in to get all of these artifacts together and put it into a display. And I believe that is it displayed at the CCHA now or coming?
It's at the Maritime Museum. It was in Saratoga battlefield for the winter, and I believe it's back at the Maritime Museum now.
That's excellent. It got good exposure, and it lets a lot of people know what the history of this area is. There's many other things out there. As I identified before, I could be here and an object could be over there, and if it's on the other side of that wall, I might not be able to see it. It would be just a hazy shadow. So as the divers increase and looking for things, more things will be found. And again, the purity of the way it's found, the purity of the way it's discovered is just exceptional. It gives you a rush as a diver finding it. Early on, as I identified, I owned the marina down where the Rusty Anchor is, and I owned the marina next to it too after a while. I had a group of divers from Canada come down. I had a scuba shop, and the divers come down to get air, buy equipment, etc. I saw a pickup truck heading to Canada. A small cannon, a couple of anchors, muskets, all kinds of things. Where you guys going? Hell, we found all this stuff. See ya. And it went to Canada. Gone. So that's why when I was diving, and I'm still diving, when you found something, you brought it up, and at least you knew where it was, you knew how it could be disposed of. But if you can find it, somebody else could find it also. Everything was kind of quiet on Lake Champlain for a few years. In 1814, the British decided to try it once again. They let out some false information, and the American garrison sent, I think, about 8,000 troops up to Sackett's Harbor for a battle that wasn't going to happen. It left the American garrison staffed with about 3,000 troops. The British Army, 15,000 strong, marched across the border on the 6th of September and invaded and occupied everything up to the north bank of the Saranac River. Kent Lord House was their headquarters. There was a Fort Moreau, a Fort Brown, and one other fort.
Scott.
Thank you. And they were all along the shoreline there. The invasion might have been successful. The British had a new flagship, the Confiance, great big boat, whatever you want to call it. It was 187 feet long, 300 tons, carried 300 fighting Marines. With 5-to-1 odds, the British figured that they were so overconfident in this battle that they were still building the boat as it sailed down the lake. I was talking with Bonnie earlier, and I've got a Xerox copy of the handwritten text of the court-martial of the British commander. They court-martialed the British commander for losing the battle. There's another angle there. The British sailed down the lake with the Confiance. The 300 men that's supposed to fire these new Congreve matchlock cannons boarded the boat the day before the battle. We were defended by Commodore Thomas McDonough. He'd been up here for a year. He had his boats drilled, have cannon fire, exercises. They knew how to handle their boats. They knew the idiosyncrasies of Lake Champlain, of which the lake has many. They assembled the American fleet across Plattsburgh Bay from Cumberland Head over to the Saranac River. The British, overconfident, sailed down the lake, scaled their guns, fired them for practice on the other side of Cumberland Head, and came around in a triumphant circle around the end of Cumberland Head. The opening salvo from the American flagship Saratoga, and I've heard that it was fired by McDonough himself, shot both the bow anchors off the Confiance. You got to visualize this. The style of fighting in those days were that they would put 2 anchors off the bow and 2 anchors off the stern. Then by tightening and loosening the anchors, they would aim the ship. It was a horizontal gun platform, and you were aiming your ship, you were aiming your broadside. Well, with both the bow anchors gone off the Confiance, she was left like a one-armed boxer, just about defenseless. The battle waged on. The Confiance was battered, 20 holes below the waterline. They careened the ship to a degree. They rolled everything over to one side. They cleared the decks for action. Everything non-essential to the battle went over the side. The British ship Finch, early in the battle, grounded on Crab Island. There's a reef on the northeast corner of Crab Island, and she grounded on that reef. I was mentioning to Bonnie, Ralph Fillion, one of the guys I used to dive with, located a canister shot with the canvas still on it off that reef at about 20 feet of water. Now, if the Finch grounded on that reef, she had to be in about 8-9 feet of water, I would think. So 20 feet of water means that the lake has built up quite a bit since the 1814 battle. Allow me to digress for a minute, because back at Valcourt, there in Sloop Cove, there are a number of caves. We were diving in one cave where the mouth of the cave was 5 feet underwater. We found a 1774 Brown Bess musket inside the cave, 15 feet inside the cave. How did it get there? I'm saying that the lake was low enough that there was a sniper in there, because there was a small skirmish on the northeast corner of Valcourt back in those days. Back to 1814. Pardon me for bouncing around like a rock in a puddle, but I haven't done this talk for quite a few years, so memory flashes hit me from time to time. The battle waged on at Crab Island, and the Finch, disabled, dismasted, was a wreck. Patients from the hospital, there was a hospital taking care of American soldiers and sailors that had smallpox. They wheeled a 6-pound cannon. The cannon wasn't 6 pounds, with 1,500 pounds. They wheeled a 6-pound cannon across the island and fired at the Finch until finally she struck her colors and surrendered. And when she surrendered, the rest of the British fleet followed suit. The 15,000 troops on shore were in shock and awe. They couldn't believe that the British fleet had lost the battle. They packed up their duffel bags, headed back to Montreal. The battle was over. The last sea battle fought by English-speaking people on the North American continent happened just outside our door, between here and the head of Crab Island. I had a couple of tugs, barges, and I had a yard that looked like any shipyard I grew up with. It kind of looked like a seagoing version of Sanford and Sons down there. But the Juniper part, I thought, was kept relatively clean, but it wasn't quite pretty enough to suit the people that were in power. So I kind of got out of there. But one of the tugs that we got is down in Port of Albany working right now, and we equipped it with a bottom penetrating sonar. And this will dig down about 15 feet in soft mud and show you objects that are down there. It won't tell you what it is, but you know there's an object down there. Well, my partner is out running that tug, and he sees an anomaly in the battle area. We went back into shore, and we took a GPS hit on it, and we went to Bill Van Socken and said, "Bill, we just saw this object out there. Would you go down and check it out?" So Bill goes out to the GPS site, goes down, comes back, there's a big steel thing in the bottom of the lake with a big wooden thing going across it. That's cool, sounds like an anchor. So we went out with my small barge, and it was really hilarious. I'd love to have a video of that. There was 6 of us on the barge with a 33-foot tug pushing it. We hooked onto the anchor, and I pulled up. I got a little donkey engine windlass on it, and I pulled up in a windlass, and I pull until the bow of the barge is 2 feet underwater. And the tail of the barge is sticking up, and the anchor, whatever it was not coming up. So here you've got 6 grown men, and I think we've had a beer or 2 by the time we got out there. So we go back on the high end of the barge, and we start to jump. Well, a pulsing of 6 grown men pounding on that barge, the anchor finally come up. The bow of the barge comes out of the water. I took another strain on it, and we finally, by jumping up and down on that barge, you managed to get the anchor up and to the surface. Brought it in with a lot of fanfare. Well, it was fanfare by the time we got in with it. And I was glad, because I was getting a little bit sick and tired that if my family came up here, I had to take them to Vermont to show them Plattsburgh's artifacts. But that's my own personal opinion. We got the anchor up. They couldn't figure out what to do with it. Chris Ortloff got $7,000 appropriated for to recover the anchor. They says, put it back, New York State's wisdom, put it back where it was. It was safe there for X number of years. So we dropped it back in the mud. Now the anchor had dropped down straight into the mud, and it was beautiful. It wasn't a speck of rust in the mud line. And because in the mud there's no oxygen. With no oxygen there's no oxidization. So the anchor was absolutely perfect. On one fluke they had written in white lead paint, Quebec. The other fluke was the weight of the anchor. Still visible. Hosed it off, it was right there. And we put the anchor back, and a year or so later we raised the anchor with a lot of fanfare, and the kids came down and schools were out, and it was good. It served a good purpose. I loaded it on my barge, and I transported it down to the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, who most graciously agreed to conserve the anchor for us. They said they would charge us $50,000 to conserve the anchor. But because of their benevolent spirit, they would only charge us $25,000. They'd donate the other $25,000. So they got a pop-up building that was plastic over tubes, and they started working on the anchor in there. I don't know, I think I see the building for sale in Harbor Freight for a few dollars. But they got the anchor in there, and they charged New York State $25,000. And the $7,000 for the recovery and handling of the anchor disappeared. I never saw it. So I'm still $7,000 in the hole on it, but at least the anchor's up. And the big key factor is it's in Plattsburgh, hopefully to be here someday. But in the direction of the conservation of the anchor, I just want to ask Keith if he would share with everybody the story that he told me about Portsmouth.
Well, about Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The same foundry that cast the anchor for the Confiance cast the anchors that are outside 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, on the dock at Portsmouth. And the I asked the curator when I went to visit there, how do they take care of them? And he turned around and he pointed to these two young sailors. And he said, that's how we take care of them. And I asked him what he meant, and he said, well, if it needs painting, we paint it. And they've been outside forever, ever since they were cast, and that's the way they are, out in the wind and the rain and the smog and the hail and whatever else they get there. But in our case here, we have to keep it temperature and humidity controlled. So there's a little bit of a dichotomy there. So.
The interesting thing is, one of the things that they've got down at Portsmouth that we don't have here, excuse me, is salt air.
Oh, yeah.
Salt air is very corrosive. So here we've got this anchor that looks like, that's all they did. It looks like black paint to me. They claim it's a tannic
Acid, yeah.
tannic solution that they do because the bacteria would eat the anchor. I know we got some tough bacteria in this day and age, but I think that's pushing the envelope just a little bit. It boils down to the fact that nothing pleased me any more than to have the Battle of Plattsburgh Association form a museum, form a group, and dedicate themselves to preserving the history of the Battle of Plattsburgh. The history that we have here is priceless. There isn't another part of this country that can brag of the things that we've got. We've got pristine beauty. We've got the beautiful mountains, a fantastic lake. We've got good accommodations. When I had my tour boat business, and I ran the Juniper for 25 years, I spent about $10,000 going to tour bus shows. Hey, I'm from Plattsburgh, New York. And they'd look at me like I just escaped from the exterminator. And we got this, we got that. And gradually I get 1 or 2 buses in every year. And it was nice because here, when you're in a tourist business, you've got a can with 48 people getting out and viewing your attractions, seeing what you've got, and leaving money with you times 48. Right now, we've got the potential of being a destination. You've got the Battle of Plattsburgh Museum. You've got Clinton County Historical Society just across the way. You've got the Transportation Museum, which has the potential of doing great things. I worked with them for a while. We've got a little locomotive. I wanted to make a locomotive, a train run from the Transportation Museum down to the harbor that would connect to the hotel whenever it happens. Well, I don't know. I heard that some people wanted to call it the lakeside, some wanted to call it the harbor side. I think the right name for it is the sewer side. What's really got to happen, and Christine tells me it's starting to happen, is the 3 museums have to work together with one central goal, and that's to bring people in here, just to look at Plattsburgh's history from the beginning of time here that we have on record to today, up through the Air Force Base and the things that happened. Clinton County Historical Society, spectacular building, unbelievable renovations that you've gotten accomplished over there. This place is fantastic. You're right here, you got the old stone barracks right nearby. You've got the base marina right down at the base of the hill. Which brings me to kind of a sore point with me. I guess what I'm thinking of is the greatest example of the difference between politicians and drunken sailors. Because drunken sailors spend their own money. Sitting out in Treadwell Bay Marina is the Weatherwax. It's a 40-foot wooden box that cost the taxpayers of the state of New York $250,000 to build. They imported wood from South America because it doesn't rot. Okay, I can agree with that. 250 grand was a lot of money to put in a 40-foot wooden box. The sales on it were $8,000. The boat was built down in Crown Point, launched down in Crown Point. They made one trip across the lake with it. They didn't have a captain. They didn't have a place to dock it. They didn't have a place to tie it. And the boat went to a marina over in Vermont. They tied it up against the steel seawall. They claim a line broke, the wind come up, and it chewed a 3-foot hole in the bow of this boat. The boat's planked with 1 3/4 thick wood. And it sat on this seawall long enough that you got a 3-foot hole in the bow. Well, the Transportation Museum found out about it. John Ionelli called me. I went down, took a look at it. A buddy of mine, John Rock, who is the man that put the flagpole up on Crab Island, put monuments on Crab Island, and Roger is the man who made it possible for us to do it, because he has mowed Crab Island till it was looking like a state park. Better than a state park, because I think he'd paid more attention to it. Anyway, John and I took a look at it, and then we called Roger. Roger is a skilled woodworker beyond anything that I could ever hope to do. I can pound a nail, and I usually bend it over so people know it's my job. We replanked the weather wax, and John and I got it certified by Coast Guard. Now, the previous owners, the Lake Placid Chamber of Commerce, told the Coast Guard the boat was going into a museum. So they'd taken all the papers and tore them up. The boat no longer exists on Coast Guard registry. So I had to do a cold start with it. And cold start with a sailboat's a little bit difficult, but we got her done. We got it inspected. We ran it for 2 years. We were servicing the lighthouse at Valcourt. I believe we took 300 passengers over the last year that we sailed the weather wax. And I had requested some changes in it. They made the changes. I went to Betty Little's office and got a $15,000 grant for the boat. And the boat right now is sitting at Treadwell's Bay Marina, high and dry, not operational. They can't find a captain. I put 2 coats of International Interlux paint on it. They scraped them off, and I think they got house paint on it. It's not been handled very well. I would love to see an agency that could do something with the boat. And both John and I are in agreement on that. The area, in order to be a destination, we have to be able to offer something, a total package. You're not going to walk in a supermarket if there's only 1 can of peas on the shelf. So now we've got CCHA, we've got Battle of Plattsburgh, we've got Transportation Museum, you got the potential of the base marina, you have the potential of Crab Island for people to go spend the day out there, get the morning boat over, take the afternoon boat back. With Roger's efforts over there, the poison ivy, if you walk into the poison ivy, it's your own fault, but there's plenty of places to go that there's no poison ivy, and I can testify to that. Valcourt Island, another one of Roger's projects, on the Valcourt Lighthouse. He and his wife labored with a lot of other volunteers to get the lighthouse up and operational and looking good. We had a ceremony to relight the lighthouse. I got 3 calls today for people that wanted to go over to Valcourt Island to the lighthouse, because the old advertisements for the weather wax are still there with my phone number on it. There was a little discussion between me and the director of the Transportation Museum, and I shan't go any further than that. I put mistletoe in my hip pocket and walked off in the sunset. But what they do with it, I don't know. They're just not responsible with it. I see a destination here. It's non-polluting, tourists, money. You've got Sturbridge Village. You've got Gettysburg. Millions of people flock to Gettysburg to see a field with some rocks in it. What do you got here? You got beauty, everything imaginable. We deserve to be a destination, and I think that the future of that decision and that reality is in the hands of Keith, Roger, and Tony Vaccaro, and whatever help the city government can give them. I thank you very much for your attention, for listening to my ranting, rambling, and otherwise uncoordinated efforts. But if there's any questions, I'd be glad to field them. Sir?
Are there many artifacts left, do you think, on the
Yes.
side of the lake? Still are.
Yes. Yeah. Again, you can swim right by them. Another interesting thing about diving and artifacts. Right off the old Inn of the Nations, the Lakeside Apartments, there's a canal schooner. We took a coin out of the mast step on that. The coin was 1744. There were cow hides on it. We dove it, and it was in 12 feet of water. We buoyed it. This is back when Tom Cronin owned the into the nations. And he gave my crew of divers one of the rooms down there, which was probably one of the worst mistakes that could have happened. But any event, we dove that wreck, 12 feet of water. We buoyed it. Had a storm come up. Went back out, the buoy is in the sand, and we got 6 feet of water. 6 feet of sand had washed in over that period of time and covered the wreck. Another time you go out there, it'll be clean. You're sitting right there high and dry. Another example of that was down on City Beach back a few years ago. Somebody came into my dock and says, "What is this?" I said, "It looks like a stem off a boat." He said, "Well, there's ribs in that down there too." So I went down to City Beach, saw it, and it was a bateau. So the bateau was raised, and I had a trucking company then. We trucked it over here, it was put into a pool. Again, would you share some of your conservation ideas? Because one of the things that I haven't hit yet is what we really need here is a conservation laboratory.
We're working on it. We have the remains, the bottom of a bateau from the period of time 1814. It's all in pieces, but it's in its own swimming pool in the building next door. And it'll remain underwater with the water circulating 24 hours a day until we can deal with it. It has been evaluated. It's definitely from the period that we know. The question is, what do you do with it after you conserve it? We have to have a place to display it, and we're working on that in long-term plans. Some say it's worthless, but from our standpoint, officially, it's the only piece that we have from that period of time that represents that kind of a boat on Lake Champlain. There were others that were found in Lake George. Well, there are many ways to conserve wood, and some of the methods are, by today's standards, a bit controversial. Some of the conservators today prefer the high-tech methods, but bottom line, it could be as simple as sugar. And what we're trying to do is put a little rationality into the conservation process. If you can conserve something in a responsible way, in a conservative fashion, why spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to conserve something just because it's high tech? So there are lots of methods that can be used, and some which have been very successful in Canada. Several assets are outside. Again, that story of the British and the anchor. There's an entire gunboat at Mallorytown, Ontario that is sitting outside that has been conserved very well, thank you much, with some very low-tech solutions. And it's sitting outside and has been for 30 years. So it's the job that we have right now, or the hurdle that we have, is introducing the conservators to a little common sense. And it seems that the more we go to school sometimes, the more stupid we get. That's just an opinion. But having been there, it becomes an interesting exercise, doesn't it?
It sure does. Turning the page back to the anchor in 1814, after the anchor was recovered, we have the GPS hit where the original location of the anchor was. My partner goes out with the tug, and he's working a tight pattern over that field. And about 200 yards from where the anchor was originally discovered, we see a debris field in the mud. The debris field measures about 60 feet wide by 200 feet long. About what the confiance that footprint might have been when she was floating over that debris field. Based on the condition of the anchor when we brought it up without any rust on it, I'm venturing that when that field is finally opened, we're going to be bringing up muskets that we can rinse off and fire. They're going to be in that good a condition that they'll be in perfect state of preservation. Again, under the mud. There are 13 Congreve cannons, I believe Colonel Fitzentz told me, that are unaccounted for. I suspect they're right down there in that same debris field. So part of my activities over the years, I owned a scuba shop, and I taught probably about 2,500 people how to dive in this area and in other areas. And two of the divers were passionate about it. They were, that guy would spend an entire dive looking at a piece of the lake bottom this big, fanning it, checking it out. These divers were talking with me, and I said, you know, guys, I said, I know what kind of a collection you got at home. Really, it isn't doing you any good at home. Why don't you get down and talk with Christine at the Battle of Plattsburgh Association? Because most of their diving has been in the 1814 battle area. So they went and they saw Christine, and one thing led to another, and they brought quite a few items down that I believe are displayed in there now.
Yes.
And it's great. I mean, when you can find a little button this big in 50 feet of water, you know the guy is down there with a microscope just checking every pebble, every rock out to make sure what's down there. These divers, I gave them the location of the debris field. I don't know if I'm up for doing a dive down there. My philosophy is I'd rather beg forgiveness than ask permission. But now you got to get more permits and stuff. But gee, if I happen to stumble into it, well, it'd be kind of neat. I don't know if I'm up for it myself physically, but I'd love to see it happen where that field gets investigated and we see what's going on down there. Again, folks, the big thing that we've got is the potential to be a destination, and that history to happen out there is our heritage. How we handle it, how we deal with it, it's up to the people in town how it's going to be dealt with. It's up to the people in the museums, Keith, Roger, Tony, Christine. It's the most positive direction I've seen in years. I come up here in 1955, and I said, boy, this place is dynamite. It's just going to blossom. Well, I've been waiting. I didn't calculate on the fact that a lot of the politicians suffered from anal cranial inversion, and they couldn't see the light of day. Everybody had their own little fiefdom and built a fence around it. But gradually I see those fences deteriorating. Gradually I see more cooperation happening. And these museums is our answer. Again, I thank you. Any other questions?
All right.
Thank you all. Thanks very much for your time.